unless somebody else would like to, out of the abundance of Bibles here tonight, I'll read. Excuse me, I got a tickle in my throat. A man in the crowd said to Jesus, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide with me the property our father left us." Jesus answered him, "Friend, who gave me the right to judge or to divide the property between you two?" And he went on to say to them all, "Watch out and guard yourself from every kind of greed, because your true life is not made up of the things you own, no matter how rich you may be." Then Jesus told them this parable. There was once a rich man who had land which bore good crops. He began to think to himself, "I don't have a place to keep all my crops. What can I do? This is what I will do," he told himself. "I will tear down my barns and build bigger ones, where I will store the grain and all my other goods. Then I will say to myself, lucky man, you have all the good things you need for many years. Take life easy, eat, drink, and enjoy yourself." But God said to him, "You fool, this very night you will have to give up your life. Then who will get all these things you have kept for yourself?" And Jesus concluded, "This is how it is with those who pile up riches for themselves, but are not rich in God's sight."
Okay, my story is from the Greek islands. So I've been to Greece a couple times, and one time when I went there, I really was noticing the priests, the Greek Orthodox clergy, because they wear black robes, and a lot of them have long beards. Some of their long beards are quite gray. And yet, many of them have young families, right? They have much younger wives and they have like little children. And I just thought it was a very funny contrast, you know. And what I learned is, I mean, I didn't really know that much about the Greek Orthodox Church at that time, hardly anything. And what it turns out to be true is that only the senior clergy remain unmarried, unless for some reason they can't find someone who's married. So their bishops are unmarried in their hierarchy, but the regular priests can marry, it's no problem. But you see the problem with that is, how do you know if you're gonna get the bishop's ring or not? So they all start out unmarried, and then as their career progresses, they're like, "Oh well, I might as well get married. I'm not ever gonna, I'm not for the upper reaches of the church hierarchy." And so,
so that's why they're old.
That's why, because they wait to see what's going to happen. Because they have, I mean, they don't say career, they say vocation when you're a priest, but it's the same thing, right? And so if not, they marry, but of course they're older now. But it's not that they forsake being a bishop in order to marry. It's that they pretty much know that they're not going to be one before they marry. So I was just kind of wondering, thinking about this, it's fine when you're maybe younger, you're going to say, well, I don't want to pursue the wealth of this world, the illusion of riches that he's talking about. But as you get older, you think, well, I pretty much maybe have what I have, and that's either the time where you're going to start to worry about this Barnes thing, or you're going to say, well, that doesn't apply to me because I'm not going to have any riches, right? So I was wondering, because a lot of times we think all this is about like one point in time and our life is never going to change. But when you're young, you're thinking, well, should I pursue wealth? I mean, I have a promising career, I can make lots of money maybe. Or you're hoping, and is hoping wrong? So, that's my kind of my first question is, what is the gospel of riches? I mean, what makes this story, because it's just one paragraph, right? If you read, there's a lot more going on in chapter 11 and 12, right? This is just one vignette.
But I don't think you see anywheres, at least in the New Testament, I won't claim to know anything about the Old Testament, but if you read the New Testament, I don't think anywheres you would hear Jesus saying, go out and make as much money as you can.
No,
But put it to good use.
well, that's the whole thing with what was once called the Protestant work ethic, and the emergence of capitalism in Western Europe was like connected somehow to the rise of Protestantism, and that, you know, which it obviously wasn't connected in this way, that Protestants read their Bible and did what it was commanded in the New Testament to seek wealth, because I think the teaching of the New Testament is barely could a rich person be saved, or almost by definition a rich person surely could not be saved, right? I mean, if you just read the New Testament, right, would you find anything different in there?
One difference that comes to my mind is that Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus were probably wealthy.
Well, along with Jesus' rich female benefactors, right? He probably had quite a few rich women whose husbands were off doing something, and they funded a lot of his ministry. As we have, what is it?
But you certainly never hear him extolling the benefits of being wealthy.
Right.
He certainly doesn't cut this anonymous guy from the crowd that calls out, "Hey, teacher, tell my brother to divide his inheritance with me," right? He certainly doesn't. Well, it did make me wonder, did Jesus allow some random person in the crowd to have a question that like diverted his whole agenda? I mean, is that what this is? No, I don't think so. I think he was trying to say something about maybe what verse 19 is, that in the parable of the rich man, Jesus is saying, so the rich man says, the foolish rich man says, "Oh, I've good for many years. My soul, I can relax and enjoy everything," right? And I think Jesus has a very different idea about not the riches part, but when the soul can relax. You know, this, because the thing about riches, it's kind of like the, you know, the hamster on the wheel, you know. It's like you got to keep, you know, especially if you're in a profession where you can have more clients or sell more whatever, or see more patients. If it's a direct thing, it's like, oh, I just work harder and more comes in, right? Then how do you slow that down?
You mind if I tell a really quick story that I'm not sure relates, because I just thought of this right now? Is that when I worked at Aflac, it was really funny that we talked about that tonight. No, I had just become like a mini manager, and I was I paid my dues, and they were letting me now have residuals off of other people's sales. It's pretty sweet to get to that position.
Oh, yeah.
And you know, the first year they were predicting anywhere between 50 and 60 grand, and then from every year on out, you're talking six figures. And I was looking at that, and I saw 10 years of my life, because you could have retired, and you know, by the end of 10, 15 years of that, and I'm just like, no, I want to go share Jesus during this time. And I went to almost every one of my clients in person, and I said, I love you, but I'm going to have to leave you in the hands of somebody else, because I'm going to go and tell other people about Jesus. That's my passion. That's my goal. Almost everybody understood, except for my immediate bosses, the people higher up in Aflac. They yelled at me for like an hour, telling me how stupid I was, how unfortunate my family was to have me in there as one of their people. And then they told me stories about how their parents suffered and how I should be so lucky to not have monetary entanglements be one of the obstacles of my life. And I just think it's so interesting when you see the curtain of people's intentions revealed that way. My bosses, I later came to find out, they're never going to listen to this. They took upon the stress of their life in very other unhealthy ways, from what I had been hearing, and it sure wasn't, doubling down and refocusing on their family or turning up the love and community service. No, it was just their job, their money making. Everything became the center of their life. We're maintaining that house, maintaining the beauty standards that come along with being very, very wealthy and making hundreds of thousands of dollars a year, and different kind of complaints than I'll ever have in my lifetime. And I don't regret turning that down for a minute or giving that up for a minute, because in terms of life satisfaction, I'm winning.
So would you say other people are wrong if they don't do what you did?
No. I think, okay, there's also this other story I have about gifts. I met this woman when I was at a box and shipping store, and they had mailboxes come in. And I came to know some people pretty well, and this lady comes in, and we get to talking, and she's an incredibly wealthy lady. She has like 5 businesses started, multi-millionaire. It's weird that she had a box in my little store. But I was like, so tell me, what's going on with you? How you're so humble, you're so cool, you're talking to a peon like me. Tell me your story a little bit. And she's just like, I have a gift where everything I look at, I can see how to make money on it. It's a gift I was given. I can look at this certain circumstance and I can say, I can see profitability there, and here's how. And then she just made it happen. And I don't think there was ill intent behind it. I don't think there was a desire to get extraordinarily wealthy and stomp on little people and crush her foes. I think she just had a gift and she wanted to use it. I'm not sure she used it to the glory of God. I think there's some things that you can do with money, like fund Jesus' ministry directly. But I know that there are people out there that just have a different way, and God has programmed them different. And I don't think my ambition or my ability to make money was the way I was meant to process this world. But I do think there are some people out there whose gift is their money. Now, the problem is, like Alex was saying, how do we get to heaven? Okay, so we in this country have a completely different problem, in that the least of these among us is within the top 95 percentile of richest people in the entire world. That's a problem. And it was a problem that's actually was displayed by one of my DCE friends. He struggled with this so much, and now, thanks to him, I struggle with this a lot. No, and it's a blessed struggle. It's a blessed struggle, because when it comes to, he said, so many DCEs and so many youth ministers whine and cry about their income. And I look at it and say, how cursed am I that it's easier for a camel to go through an eye of a needle than for me to enter heaven. I'm like, wow, that is perspective changing. That we have so much wealth and so much overabundance that we can't even, we don't even understand our condition. So with that, those two stories, I want to give it back to you, because I hope that...
Well, that's the question, right? Is a rich and a celebrated person always a fool? Because, I mean, in the parable, the one example was, you fool, what do you think? I mean, what you're saying is, no, a rich and celebrated person is no more foolish than a like upper middle class person or middle class person who, you know, goes on vacations, has air conditioning in their house, you know.
Which idol are you going to turn to instead of God? That's the big question I think that we always have to ask ourselves. I think money makes it harder. I think because man, when Jesus tells us, right, look at the lilies of the field, look at the birds in the sky. I don't think he's joking about that. I don't think he's using hyperbole. I think he's pointing us to the fact that, man, you really think that your retirement's going to save you? You really think that you're gonna work your best years and then you're gonna suddenly relax? I don't think that changes unless you have my peace in your heart. But what do you think? I want to toss this back. I'm stealing your message here.
Well, I think that I'll have time because we've been going over, so I wanted to be able to not have it be so long. But yeah, there's other things other than wealth that we can fall into the trap, and Jesus has the same thing, you know. Like when his family members come for him and they say, "Oh, Jesus, your family is here," and he goes, "These are my mother and my brothers right here, man." He does it, you know. Different things might be our idols, you know. I mean, I didn't come from a family where it'd be easy to idolize the people or the ideals of family life, but
Oh,
I mean,
yeah.
there was nothing wrong with it, but it wasn't like it was going to be, you know, celebrated as anything. So, you know, that's not my problem. But there's other things we could idolize, not just money, but our culture is one of right now, especially as the haves and the have-nots, and so people are fearful of being over on the other side of the have-nots.
So we think calls to extremism are extraordinarily irresponsible. And in most cases, in many cases they are. I would challenge though that when Jesus talks to us about how we need to live our lives and who we follow and what we do, he cannot underemphasize the extremism to which he calls us not to obey, not to fear, not to destroy on behalf of, but to love him and trust in him. I would dare call that there's not too much extremism we can go when it comes to what the result looks like, to what loving God looks like. And I think it should trouble us when we put limits on how much we should love God.
No, there we go. Go ahead, go back now. One more. Yeah. So this is verse 15, right? Life is not made up of the things that you own. Of possessions, right? And so here's the thing: it's like if you have a lot of money or not, your life can be empty. That's the true fact, right? I mean, just look at, you know, like when I was a kid, you know, Howard Hughes was considered like, you know, ultimately wealthy and very troubled guy, right? It's like,
Is he the one that grew his fingernails?
he might have, because he was very reclusive, right?
Yeah, I mean, he had, other than spiritual problems.
Yeah. So what I'm saying is, you don't have to look, if you look at a long list of, you know, wealthy and prominent people, you're going to look at a list of people who are struggling, they're outright crazy, they're, you know, it's not a panacea. It's like a certain amount of wealth or resources is helpful, right? Because there's nothing more stressful than having a bunch of bills that you can't pay. I mean, that's very stressful, right? That's horrible, right? And having a lot more fear of the future, you know, you think you're always going to get laid off from your job and you won't be able to pay your bills if you get paid on Friday. Sure, I mean, that's very stressful. I mean, who would say that, you know, the Apostle Paul says, I've learned to abase and abound, right? Regardless if I had a lot or little, I could be okay. But there was some American
We don't live
comedian
that way.
that said, I've been rich, I've been poor, and rich is better. You know, so there is an element of, well, even the Bible says the same thing in Proverbs. It's like you don't want to be too poor, right? It's too hard, right? You tempted to steal, you know,
Yeah.
you might curse God for your bad situation. So I think it was recognized. But it's just saying, there's all these stories, and you can anoint it with rich man seems like equals good person, right? Fortunate person, a lot of choices is like, just tell me how big the barns have to be. That's my only question, right? It's easy. But Jesus said no. It's like you just put a label on somebody, it doesn't change what's really going on there, you know. Rich or poor, you know, I mean, clearly, what the Bible says about wealth is that people that have some means have an obligation to the poor, right? And we're not, in our culture, we're not very good or adept at doing that, because we want to pay taxes to the government, have the government take care of everything, and then we don't have to. It's like I gave it the office type of, you know, thing about.
Well, honestly, the church should be the means by which the poor are fed. Like, it shouldn't be government entities. There is at least an argument to be made that the church should be our biggest source of social security.
So,
Sorry, Ron, what were you going to say?
I think I was gonna say that the love of money isn't the only form of greed.
Right.
That one can have, be greedy to be recognized, and be greedy to be the best Christian maybe.
Yeah.
if only if this, right, when you have this thing, if only if this were true, then it would be, everything would be wonderful. But life experience teaches you that when you get all those things that you thought, oh, if only this, then it's like, okay, you have that now, but you still have to live. You still have to live rightly. So you can't short circuit any of Tim's questions by saying, okay, I got this now. You know, because I don't think life is so easy to have the got this part.
So the word greed is probably better translated, at least from my reading, as covetousness, right? And we're taught, that's one of the 10 Commandments, right? You should not covet. It's a couple of commandments, actually. And so covetousness also in Colossians, it's actually shockingly defined. You're right, that any sort of greed, any sort of covetousness is de facto, according to Colossians 3:5, if we can look that up, it says in parentheses, this is idolatry. And so anytime you're greedy, anytime you are playing around with covetousness, you are playing around with something that you are attempting to replace God with. And so I think you're right, it's not just a singular substitute that we're trying to make.
I mean,
If I heard you correct.
I think there's no accident that the calf that they made in the desert when Moses was gone too long getting the 10 Commandments was made of gold, right? I mean, the whole thing it's kind of a proxy for all kinds of idolatry. Right? It's like, you know, they didn't make it out of copper or something. You know, it would have been just as shiny, right?
Even though gold is shockingly worthless in a desert.
Yeah, you kind of.
It's we artificially inflate things' importance all the time.
I thought it was interesting that in chapter 11 he has a little blurb about this. Jesus doesn't really develop it, but it's like he criticizes the Pharisees not for what they did, but because they're part of a system, right, that has unhappy consequences. And he says, therefore, alas for you, because you built the tombs of the prophets and your fathers killed them. You therefore are witnesses that you consent to your father's works, because they killed them and you do the building. And he's talking about, you know, killing apostles and prophets. And So the Pharisees and the teachers are criticized because they have their role to play in the system, and they're going, well, we didn't hurt anybody, we're just embellishing the tombs to the prophets. And it's like, well, you're basically saying you agreed that they were killed. And it's like, well, I guess he probably knew their hearts, but it would be the first thing. If someone's like putting up a statue of someone, like if somebody has a statue of Martin Luther King, and then Jesus is going to come and say, well, you're basically agreeing that he should have been killed, otherwise why are you putting up a statue? You know, I mean, it's a funny thing that he's saying, you know, just the logic of it, but clearly it means that he's accusing them of part of a system that kills prophets. And I think, you know, economics is kind of like that too. So, you know, very successful, worked in the economic machine, and it's like, well, you're part of a system, and what does that system do? It's lifted a lot of people out of poverty, and it's had a lot of other consequences that are not good. And the problem with human freedom, which is people get richer, do they get freer? That's that's really the question that's the heart of what you said, right? Is we think, oh, if I had all this money, I could tell my boss to stick it and do what I wanted, right? So of course I would be freer, but I don't think he's saying too much that agrees with that. It's like, yeah, you're still part of the system, and you're not free, you know, because everyone who sins is a slave to sin, right? And so you're still, I think it gets beyond you want to bear the image of a rich person, right? Or Jesus says in Colossians, well, Jesus is the image of God, and his disciples are trying to be like him. That's why last week said, teach us to pray, they asked, because they want to be like him, right? Because he's the rabbi, right? And that's what disciples of rabbis do. Only instead of having to go through all these levels of schools and be selected to follow some, you know, prominent rabbi, he just picks up some fishermen and a tax collector and some other dudes on the side of the road, basically, and elevates them to this level of disciple. And so once they get through being amazed that the guy would even talk to them, they like want to be like him.
Alex, we're all in this room and we all have money. How do we live with ourselves going home tonight? And how do we avoid tearing down our barns for the sake of tearing them down, really? Or for economic gain to build how do we, and what if we've already built our barns? We've lived with the expectation that we have another day. We haven't, we've lived like this guy, except God gave us another day. There's something difficult about this.
Well, I think that's the issue. It's like we presume a lot, not that riches are good or bad, although the New Testament has a lot more to say about them being bad. And the Old Testament was, of course, a rich person was righteous, kind of by definition.
Mm-hmm.
Jesus shoots that up. But I think it's what you said. It's like, it's presumptuous of us to say that we are going to live and get gain, right? And, you know, why wouldn't we be like, okay, if we live and the Lord tarry, then we will do such and such that we think is worthy of someone living their life. Because the first thing that falls is that if you are rich, you will be filled, right? No, you can be rich and be empty, right? And the second thing is that we don't have to, that everyone's going to be empty, so it's okay, we'll just like live as we are one day at a time. And it's like, no, it's like, you know, as you go through your life, like maybe tonight on the way home or tomorrow, there'll be opportunities to go out of your way, just like one step or half a step out of your way, or ask someone, what did you mean by that comment? And you could get into some divine encounter right at that moment. It's actually pretty easy, except for we sort of are programming ourselves well, I'm just going here, I'm not talking to a lot of people, I don't wanna, I just say hi to my neighbor, but I don't really mean, how are you doing? You know, if you wanna have those encounters, that's one of the things. I mean, Jesus maybe didn't seek crowds, but he sought out people that he wanted to talk to. And it's just, so I think it's more like, it's a distraction. When you live in a rich country, you kind of have to live up to whatever the standard is, otherwise you're a loser. And it's like, Paul said, it was like, if someone is a slave and a believer, they should think of themselves as Christ's freed man, right? They shouldn't think of themselves as being, at the lowest level of society. And if somebody is at the highest level of society, they should think about themselves as Christ's slave.
Yeah.
And so I think that gets back to what you're saying, is that since we're probably in this higher group, a lot of us in Portland, we should maybe think of ourselves as,
we're owned.
Christ's agenda is the one that, he bought us, right? He not only brought us, but he bought us, right? And
I love that.
You don't want to be a slave to sin.
Our agenda, yeah, right, because this is how it is for those who pile up riches for themselves. They think they have all that freedom. They think they have all this autonomy, but they're not rich in God's sight. They're not acknowledging, because you hate to do this in slave terms, but when you are a slave, at least on the so surfacey level of which I understand slavery, you don't get to decide what you do with your life anymore. Somebody else has dictated your day. They've dictated what breath this is going to take. You're going to do this in this breath, this in that breath. You get to eat here, you get to eat there. You get to go to sleep now. And then you better be ready, because the master's calling on you tomorrow to do the exact same thing. And we do not have a master. It comes down to maybe that submission thing again, right? We have a master who we get to joyfully submit to because they have earned the title of master. Because God himself has come and redeemed us. He's bought us back, like you said. He's died on the cross. He's proven that he is the master, willing to give anything. And so we get to experience the benefits of that. So let's be a willing slave this week, a willing bondservant. Also recognizing that we are adopted. We are in the family of Christ also. We have this weird tension in our lives, right? We are simultaneously family, but we acknowledge that in that family we don't get to make our own decisions. God has.
Well, Paul didn't say we were slaves who were freed or freed that is becoming slaves. He just said, think of yourself like that, because it's a lot more helpful than how you're thinking about it.
Right.
So that's how you're presenting it. Just consider that you could trust in Christ to make your provision. And of course, in our culture, everybody's expected to work and try to be independent and do for themselves, right? It's not like when Pastor Presnell goes to Rwanda and for the on-site part of these numbers have faces, right? He meets with people who are from a very different culture, and it's more cooperative. Not everybody's supposed to make it on their own, or whatever. Like Mary Tyler Moore. I mean, these ideals are celebrated here, and they're seen in other places of the world as being kind of nutty. So, I mean, part of that is.
And maybe if you, because man, I almost wonder, is your life rich because of all the money you have in it, or is it rich because you have formed relationships? Firstly, because you're in relationship with the one true God who has chosen to come and save your sorry butt. But also, it's just, our world doesn't operate completely differently. I went through a period of time where I just didn't have a job. I was going through a tough period of life, and I just chose to, I'm like, I have savings. I'm going to not work for a year. I just need to escape the world. And what I did during that year was, instead of investing my time in work, I invested my time in people. In that year, I made money. My relationships in the bank that I built in investing in the people of God especially, but it's even those, I talked with everybody I could, and life became that much more better. And I think that's also something we can. What are you investing in? What are you?
Amen.
Going
It's 7:30 though.
Yeah, let's go. Let's pray.
One more prayer.